Hello all, so welcome to the lab, and today's lab is about AWS Compute and Storage, Elastic Beanstalk and DynamoDB. So in the previous section we covered EC2 and S3, so it is the next part, which is like Beanstalk and DynamoDB. So in this lab you will learn about Beanstalk, like what is Beanstalk, how to deploy your application on Beanstalk, and I'll also explain the deployment strategies on Beanstalk, or like it doesn't depend on Beanstalk, but like in general deployment strategies. It's not in the scope of your course, but I wanted to add it because it's like good to know. And then DynamoDB, so it is the NoSQL database of AWS, and it is really fast database. So you'll learn about that. Okay, so first is AWS Elastic Beanstalk. So before going to Beanstalk, let me ask you one question. So like let's say I'm a project manager and then you guys are team lead or AWS engineer, infrastructure engineer. So let's say I tell you to build a scalable application and it could serve like 10 million users. So to deploy your application, what are the things you need? First is compute service, right? So you will use EC2 because you deploy an app on EC2, right? But it needs to scale. So what else do you need with EC2? Load balancer and ASG, auto scaling group, which is like rules you define in ASG policy. Like if my CPU utilization goes above 70%, or if my like EC2 instance memory is getting higher than 70%, then create 2 more instances. So and then you can give like minimum instance number like 10 and maximum 20. So like it will really be like in between 10 to 20. So this is what ASG does. So you'll do that, right? So like EC2 instance, load balancer, ASG to deploy our application, right? So this will take like fair amount of your time to provision these things, right? Because you'll have to manually create EC2 instance target groups for load balancer and then configure that load balancer with EC2 instance. So here comes Elastic Beanstalk. So Elastic Beanstalk is basically a developer-centric service. So let's say you want to deploy your Python application or Node application or any application on Beanstalk. So the things which you need to manage is your application, and everything else will be managed by Beanstalk. So you can like just upload your code bundle or provide a Docker image of your code, and like select the configuration which you need, like simple EC2 instance and 1 load balancer, or Elastic IP with EC2 and 2 EC2 and then 1 load balancer, something like that. Then Beanstalk will create it on its own. What you have to do is like manage your application. So this is a developer-centric service where you can focus on your development and business logic, and infrastructure is managed by AWS. So you might want to check out the service for your term project. It will be easier than EC2. Okay, so Elastic Beanstalk automatically handles the deployment of the application. If you need a load balancer, it can give you load balancer. It will create a database for you if you need it. And then it automatically monitors application health as well. So like if your application is down, you'll be notified. Then you have full control over the configuration. So like you can select any type of EC2 which you need based on your use case, and then how many EC2 you need, or how many compute service you need, how big your RDS database should be, something like that. So like you have all the control for that. And just like I said, like developer can focus on application and Beanstalk will handle everything else. So let's move to hands-on. So this is like Beanstalk console. So first of all, I'll create an application. I'll write the name as this and create an application. When you create an application, you'll have to create an environment for your application. So I'll click on create environment. So now it asks for 2 things. First is web server environment, and second is worker environment. So web server environment are basically our application, like web hosting application, backend service, or a React application, something like that, which is like it is a server, basically server application. And second is worker environment, which is like have you heard about cron jobs or any type of jobs? Like it is like when something is triggered, a job is run and it will be finished, and it will be like your instance will be closed. So let's say like I need to clean 10 TB of data set, something like that. So I won't need a server for it. I'll create a job assign EC2 instance for that job, and that EC2 instance will have code to clean that dataset. And once the dataset is cleaned, it will stop. So this is called a job. So it has a start point and an end point. And once the job is finished, it will like close the compute service. But a web server is like something which you need running because it is serving your front end or back end application. So this is the difference between them. Okay, so name of the environment. So I'll write as CSCI 5409 lab app, and I'll name this environment as development. Now, when you create your application on Beanstalk, it will create a domain, like a domain name for you, DNS name for you. So you can like modify it if you need, but I'll keep as it is. And description, I'll set okay, so next part is platform. So in that you can select your programming language which you have used. So I'll select Python. I'll keep everything as it is. So it gives like 3 options. Next, application code, which is like the code you have to provide. So first is sample application, which is like given by Beanstalk, and like you don't have to provide any code. It is for learning purpose. So like if you don't have any code yet, then you can provide this, or like click on this sample application and it will deploy a sample application on Beanstalk. Otherwise, you can like provide a version which is already uploaded somewhere in your application, or next is upload your code to this. So and to upload your code, you can either use S3 URL or local file. So like from your local machine or S3. So first of all, let me push the code. Okay, so we'll go through the code later, but basically I have created a Python application, and to create your application bundle, there is this website. It has like list of commands for you. So if you have Windows, then you can just like zip this folder which contains all your application like code. And if you're using Mac, then you have to fire this command to zip, and that command is provided here. Because like zip works differently in Mac. When you zip something in Mac, it like creates a __ Mac OS folder. So that's why use this command to zip your code. Otherwise, for Windows, it's like pretty simple. Zip the folder. Okay, so I'll first create a zip file for my application, then we'll go through the code later. I'll name the zip file as development lab 7. So it has created a zip file. Now I'll go back to this. So this is so like in this here version label. So like what prefix you want to give to each version. So like whenever I upload a new version of my application, it will increment itself. Like initially it will be version 1, then 2, 3, 4. So it is like a prefix you want to give. So I'll choose the file, this one, upload it. Now these are the presets. So like I mentioned before, Elastic Beanstalk handles the infrastructure provision for you. So if I click on this single instance, then it will create a EC2 instance for me, and it will also create a Elastic IP for me, and it will deploy my application on that single EC2 instance. If I click on this high availability, then it will create multiple EC2 instances and one load balancer, and then it will deploy all the application code in your EC2 instance, and it will like redirect your load to the load balancer which is created by it. So based on your like use case, you can select any type of configuration here. So, and if you need a custom configuration, then click on custom. So for now, I'll select this one because it takes time to provision this stuff, but feel free to try this out on your own. So I'm selecting a single instance. So we have a lab role, so I'll click on this one. So it is like the service role for the EC2 instance. Then key pair, I'll select my key pair, and then instance profile as lab instance profile because it will give you the AWS access to the EC2 instance. So any questions so far? Okay, so I'll click on next. So VPC, I'll select the default VPC, and I'll select these two instances, and I'll select IP address available. So I'll select this one to keep to have a public IP address for my EC2 instance. I don't need a database here for my application, so I won't go to this section. But if you need a database, then you can like directly create a database from here. So that's why like Beanstalk is used. It like does everything for you. You just need to focus on your application, and rest is like provisioned by Beanstalk. So instance configuration. So like, do you know root volume? Okay, so like when you install, let's say you have Windows machine, right? So your C drive is your root volume, basically. So when you install EC2 instance, root volume is like the volume which is attached to EC2 instance, like inside the EC2 instance, and all your files will be stored in the root volume. And when you need to have some storage for your EC2 instance, then what you do? You create a that's in GCP, but in Elastic, block storage, EBS. So you create a EBS of like X number of GB, and then attach that EC2 like EBS storage to your EC2. It is called mounting. So you mount that storage to that. So it will be like a drive inside your EC2. So this is like root volume. So I'll keep everything as it is, 8 GB of root volume, and auto scaling group. So it is single instance. So it doesn't need a ASG. Do you know spot instances? So I'm using on-demand instance, but there are two types, like there are multiple types of EC2 instance. So spot instance, does anyone know what is it?
It's like that will be available for a while, but if demand increases at the AWS end, then that device will be released.
Yeah, so basically on-demand instances are costlier and spot instances are like cheaper. So what are spot instances? I'll say, like, let's say in AWS, like out of all your their EC2 instances, they have some reserve instances, like let's say 100 instances, and me and you are the customers of AWS. So we both need to run some jobs. I explained job before, right? So we both need to run some jobs, and it is not critical. So whenever like AWS have some cheap resources available, I'll tell them to run that job for me and then store that data somewhere else, like somewhere where I need it. So what spot instances will do is like AWS manages this spot instances, and they are like cheap instances. So whenever they get some free compute resources available, they will allocate it to the customers, and customers will bid on that instance, and that way they can like run the job which are not critical, and that is why it is cheaper. But when AWS need that computer resource back, they will like take the spot instance back. So other use case of spot instances, like I mentioned in ASG, let's say when you register for your course in every term, you have to wake up at 7 a.m. right, in order to get the course you need. So imagine like from infrastructure side, when the course registration is near, the load on the website will be higher, and rest of the term there will be no load, right? So at that time they will need more compute resources. So what they should do is have some like 3 EC2 instances, base instances, and have 5 spot instances above it. Now at 7 a.m. they will have those 5 spot instances above their base instances. So they will have like 8 instances now, and like when the day ends, they will remove the spot instances. So when you need to scale for some period of time, you use spot instance because it's cheap, right? So when you work on cloud, you have to like do the cost measure and then compute measure, everything. You can't just do like highest EC2 instance and then like deploy it, because it will like cost a lot. So basically this is like the difference. And if you're in Fina Node 2, then you'll know about spot instances. Okay, so which type of instance I need? So you can select the type of instance you need. So I'll keep T3 micro, and next. Health reporting, I'll keep this basic because I don't need this right now. This as well. If you write like your email here, then you will be notified when your app is crashed or a deployment is successful, something like that. So you can add your email here. Now application deployments. So Beanstalk gives like a list of different deployment strategies. I'll explain that later. For now, it is like just one because we have one EC2 instance. And I'll keep the rest of it as it is. And then next. So these are the configuration, and if I submit it, it will start creating the environment. So it will take some time. So I have one question. So like, do you know infrastructure as a code? So which service do you use for that in AWS? CloudFormation, right? So basically Beanstalk, so we tell Beanstalk to create EC2 instance for us, or like load balancer for us, something like that. So what Beanstalk does is like behind the scene, it creates a CloudFormation script, and then it executes that script. So if I go to CloudFormation, it has created a CloudFormation script, and it is creating resources right now. So behind the scene, it is using CloudFormation. So we'll let it load. Till then, I'll first explain the deployment strategies and then we'll go to the code. So this is like extra part, so feel free to skip the part in the video. So deployment strategies, so what are that? So let's say, again, we are talking about at the scale of Instagram or a big scale applications, right? So let's say we take an example of Instagram again. So they want to release a new update to their app. So how will they deploy their code to their resources? So they might be having 500 or like hundreds of compute resources, right? So when you want to deploy a new version of your code, what will you do? The simplest answer will be like do the all at once deployment. So in this type of deployment, let's say there are 4 servers running and they are all running on V1 version of your application. So what you will do is like stop all the application, do the git pull origin main, so that your repo will be like updated and your code will be updated. So it will be V2 and then start your application again. So now you are running the new version of your application and like all your computers are running on the new application. So in this case, the deployment is faster, but there'll be a downtime because you are stopping the instance. So have you heard like Instagram is down because they're updating? It never happens. So they are not using this. So in this, there is no additional cost. So when do you use this deployment? When you don't need a downtime. And when is it? In your development environment. So you use this strategy mainly in development environment because as a provider, you won't you shouldn't have a downtime, right? So that. Now next is rolling deployment. So in this, let's say again you have 4 compute resources and they are running on V1. So in the rolling deployment, there is a bucket size. So you define a bucket size, and let's say the bucket size is 2. So now you have 4 instances. Now if you have 2 bucket size, then you will stop your 2 instances, then update those update your application and run your instance again, then stop next 2 instances, then update your application code, and that way like it will be like a rolling update, and as per the size of the bucket, your instance will be stopped and updated, and then your application will be running again. So this is a rolling update. Now here, what is the downside? First is like you will have 50% of your like compute power available at this moment, and at this moment there will be like 2 versions of your application. So this is some downside of this rolling update mechanism. Now next is rolling with additional batch deployment. So it is kind of like a rolling update, but here it works a little different. So let's say a batch size is 2 in this case. So what it will do is like you have 4 instances. So it will create 2 more new instances based on the bucket size. Then it will stop the old instances based on the bucket size, then update those instances, then next, and then delete the ones which is not needed. So like overall, you will have same number of instances, but here the compute power is 100%, not 50%. So this is like the difference between these two. So when you need 100% compute power, then you use this one, otherwise use this one. Next is immutable deployment. So what do you mean by immutable? It shouldn't change, right? So in this case, you have a current ASG. So you create a new ASG with the new servers, and then you merge those in the current ASG, and then delete the old one. So basically, your old compute resources are not touched or changed. So this is why it is called immutable deployment. And it is good for production, but then you have 3 instances, you are creating 3 more. So you are doubling your compute power, so that's why it is costly. So high cost and double capacity because 6 instances are running right now. Now blue-green deployment, have you heard about blue-green deployment in the lecture? Okay, so this is kind of used by Instagram, I think, so or Facebook. So this is also like 0 downtime deployment, and blue is like your current version, green is like your new version. So when you want to deploy your new version, just like immutable deployment, you create a new like number of servers with the latest version running, and you have a DNS server here. So what, for example, in AWS there is Route 53 DNS service. So what you will do is like you will provision your new application on new servers. Now you will redirect 90% of the route to your old application and 10% route to the new one. Then test these applications. If it is working well, then you increase this to 50% and this to 50%. So now 50% request goes to this one and 50 this, and then 80 and then 100% this, and then this is like closed. So this is called like a blue-green deployment. It is also like costly. So next is traffic splitting. So it is same as blue-green. So you split the traffic 90 and 10%, and then based on that, the difference is like it is managed by ALB, so load balancer. So I'll show you like this deployment in Lambda function in the next lab. So these are like basically the deployment strategies. Any question in this? Yeah.
I think immutable you said is expensive.
Yeah.
So, but that would be expensive for let's say 1 hour.
Yeah.
But overall, it's not expensive.
Expensive than others, and like you'll be not running for just 1 hour, because at that level, so like let's say you can't test everything in 1 hour at that scale, right? Like we are talking about like Instagram level scale, so that's why. Yeah.
On the blueprint that you said, so isn't it something for the canary?
Yeah, so like canary testing is so do you know the thing behind canary, why it is called canary test? So in the past, like canaries are like birds. So in the past, like whenever the companies wants to test something new, they will send the canary birds to that, and if it dies, then it's not safe, but if it is not that, then it is safe. So the name comes from that, canary testing. And basically here what it says is like you send 90% traffic to this and 10% traffic to new one. Now if this fails, you can always stop this one and keep 100% here. So it is basically for rollback. So like whenever something fails, if the new deployment fails, then you can like delete the new deployment and go back to the older one.
What happens in case of blueprint if it fails?
Same. So like it is like kind of similar.
Because I remember from like I may be wrong, but for the canary, maybe that was like a gradually shifting traffic.
Also, and there is user pool as well in the canary one, as far as I know. Like for example, if there is a big company, then they will have the new updates to their employees, and then they will test those things, and then it will be like increased to their geolocation, and then to the whole public thing. So
It's like A/B testing.
yeah, A/B testing is kind of different, but yeah. Okay, so the app is deployed. So let's see if it is working. Okay, it is working. So here, like remember when we used to deploy our application on EC2, we used to use an IP address. Here we are not using IP address, we are using this DNS name, because Beanstalk provides us a DNS name. So you can also use IP address if you go to EC2. So there is this EC2 CSCI 5409 Lab 7 app development. So this is the EC2 which is running our application. So this is like public IP address, and it has created a DNS for it. So you can either use IP address or DNS, and this is like a small application which is running on Beanstalk now.
So because of the IP would be changing if
Yeah, that's why it creates an elastic IP to keep the public IP same, and then creates a DNS which redirects to that IP address.
So you cut in the source code, or you have to build the source code with that?
Yeah, so now let's go to the code. Okay, so this is my app.py, and then in Flask you have static folder to like store the images or CSS or JS files, template folder to store the HTML file, and then app.py to have like all your business logic. So basically what I did is like I zipped this whole folder and then provided it to Beanstalk. So in Python you don't build the app. In Java you have to build and create a jar file, but in Python you just run the app, right? Python app.py. It will run the app directly. So in this thing you just need to like zip this whole folder which contains everything and provide it to Beanstalk, and it will run it.
Let's say you have to deploy any UI stuff, so we have to run it in that case, we don't have to build it.
Yes, so in that case you have to build npm run like build and then provide the disk. But like generally you don't host backend or like front end things on Beanstalk, because if you write npm run build, then it creates a minified JS and CSS and all version for you, and you just need a disk folder to run it. So basically it is static, not dynamic. So you can basically deploy it on S3. Otherwise you can always deploy on EC2 or some instance as well. But if it is static, then there is no need to do it. Okay, so first thing we should see is like ebignore folder. So just like git ignore, it is ebignore. So functionality is same. So I don't need to go through this. So next is eb extension folder. So when you create your application, in the root folder you have to create a .eb extension folder, and inside that you will have to add the configuration of your application. So basically configuration are in form of YAML, but the extension should be .config, not YAML. The name can be of anything. So you can name it anything, but remember the extension is .config, not .yaml. Now, if you go through the documentation, it has provided like documentation for all the programming languages. So here, like all this documentation is given based on the language you use, like Node and Express, Python, Django, Python Flask, and all. So you can go through this as per your need and get the things you need to write in the like this configuration. So for Flask, it needs like this thing, WSGI path. Rest is same. So what this says is like WSGI path : this app is like name of this file. So if I name it as main.py, I'll write main here. So app is for app here. So if I rename this to main.py, I'll write main here. And next app is when you create a Flask instance, you create a like here when I import Flask, I have to instantiate it, right? So whatever name I have given here, I have to give here. So there are two things you need to see: the name of the instance of Flask and the name of the file. And based on your programming language, it will change. So like for Java, it will be something else. For Django, it will be something else. So go through this document and see what it is. I mentioned these two links in the PPT, so you can check out it later. Okay, so any doubts so far? Okay, so now you know how to deploy an application on Beanstalk. Now, moving to next part, DynamoDB. So have you used DynamoDB before? Okay, so you know, right? SQL and NoSQL database. So relational and non-relational database. So DynamoDB is NoSQL database. So basically, it doesn't have any schema, proper schema, and you can store anything on DynamoDB. Conditions apply. So DynamoDB is like very fast and robust database. So like it says, it can handle millions of requests per second. So one use case will be like, let's say you play Fortnite, something like that, and millions of users play Fortnite at like any time. So they have some score, XYZ score, and if there are millions of players running the game, their scores will be changing at like runtime. So like imagine if changing the score at every second for a million users. So if you use RDS, then it might crash, like MySQL database could crash. It needs a like high scalable database so that it can like update the values in the fast. So you can either use a cache here instead of a DB, proper DB, because they are faster, or you can use DynamoDB. So it is as fast as your caching database like Redis. It's like near to that. So, but the difference is like those Redis database are like you don't have like TBs of Redis cache, but you can have TBs of DynamoDB. So when should you use it? So when you need a non-relational database plus very fast, highly scalable database, then you should use the DynamoDB, and it can like scale to TBs, 100 of TBs. So it is that scalable, but then it is that costly as well. The next good thing is like since it is created by AWS, so it gives you fine-grained control of IAM. So what it means is like, let's say in database you have tables and row, right? So you can have like policies for access to each row as well. Like if you have 10 millions of rows, so you can have like policies which restrict user to like thousands of rows. So it gives you that fine-grained like IAM policies. So you can do that. And it can have like infinite number of rows basically because it can scale up and down. The next thing is like each table should have primary key, which is like then for every database, but the max size for an item is 400 KB. Here item is a row in terms of DynamoDB. So you can only have 400 KB of an item. So let's say if I have a backend application and I want to store image as well. So what will I do? Because image could be like more than 400 KB. Yeah, so what you do is like store the image on S3 and then store the path of that image to DynamoDB. So don't like store the image on DynamoDB, otherwise you will get an exception of maximum size exceeds something like that. Okay, so type of data which you can store. So string, number, binary, boolean, null, list, hash map, then string set, number set, binary set. Okay, so in DynamoDB, next is like you have two types of keys. First is primary key and second is sort key. So by the definition, primary key should be unique, right? So you have to have a primary key in your DynamoDB, and what sort key is like the combination of primary key and sort key should be unique. So basically, as per this example, product ID 1 has book ID, product ID 2 has album ID, product ID 2 has track ID as well. So you can have like this kind of thing in DynamoDB. So if you want to have two types of thing, then use the sort key as well. Okay, and these are the attributes. So basically, if I have book name and then author name, publishing year, so basically these are the attributes. So do you know hashing? Okay, so this is a DynamoDB, right? So in DynamoDB, why it is scalable to that like level? Because it has like partitions in it. So for example, let's say I have this payload where user ID is the primary key, and these are the attributes like first name and last name. So I want to store this in my DynamoDB table. So it has a primary key, right? So what it will do is like create a hash of this primary key, and based on this hash, it will store it in like XYZ partition. So let's say if the formula is like primary key divided by some prime number, which is like 3, then the remainder will be like, if it is 10, if this is 10, then the remainder will be 1, because 10 modulo 3, so 1. So it will store in partition 1. In real, the formula is like pretty complex, but in the simplest term, it will be like this. So all the keys which has remainder 1 will be stored here, and then XYZ, something like that. So that's how like it can scale. So whenever this kind of remainder 1 kind of request comes, it will redirect to partition 1. So that way, this won't have that much load. Like a single partition won't have that much load in it, because they are like segregated based on partitions. Your data is segregated based on partitions. So that's how it scales. And then it can also scale up and down the partition. So basically, this is the logic behind it. Okay, so now coming to the hands-on part again. So I have deployed an app on Beanstalk. We are only using a single instance, so consider like arrow like this. And my application is also accessing DynamoDB. So first of all, let me explain the code. Do you have any question in the EB extension part? Okay. So coming back to the code. First of all, I'll go to DynamoDB. So this is the console of DynamoDB, and first thing you do is create table. So I'll write the table name as users. Now partition key, which is primary key of like in the sense of like database, partition key is like primary key. So I'll write user ID, and it is in the form of string. And sort key is optional, so I don't need sort key here, so I'll keep it optional. Now you can have default settings DynamoDB or have customized settings. So you can have DynamoDB standard or standard IA. So what it means is like you can have multi-AZ DynamoDB or a standard single AZ DynamoDB table. So it is like that. Next is you can increase the DynamoDB capacity on demand, or you can provision it as per your need. So if you keep this on, then it will be costlier because it is managed by AWS. But if you know how much load which will coming to a DynamoDB, then you should provision it, because it could save you some cost. And here in the read capacity also, you can click it on and off auto scaling part, and it write scale. So like if you know like this much of write I'll do per second, then I can keep this off. But I'm not sure if how many users will be coming to my like application and how much read request I'll fire. So I'll keep the read capacity auto scaling on.
So let's say like you said, so
Yeah.
let's say per hour I'm getting 50 read requests and 10 write requests. So in that case, how would I know?
So DynamoDB has RCU and WCU. So RCU is like reading unit per second, and then WCU is like writing unit per second. So for every read, it takes like 2 WCU or something like that. So there is a formula to like know how much things you need to provision, like how much you will set here. So I don't remember the formula, but you should check that out. So WCU, so you need to calculate WCU and RCU in DynamoDB and then select them. So like based on just for lab, I don't need to mention all this. So for example, it is 5 RCU and 5 WCU here. So it is like default settings, and if I click on default, then it will have auto scaling on. So if I need more access, then it will like scale the DB. So you can check it out. What are the WCU and RCU in DynamoDB and how to calculate them. So there is a formula there. You can check that out. So I'll create the table. Also, like while developing the application, I faced one error. It was pretty like dumb error, but it took a long for me to find a solution. The issue was like when I created this DynamoDB table, I'm in North Virginia, US East 1, right? So when I was connecting, so like when I was creating the DynamoDB instance, you have to give the region name because it is region specific service, not the like whole Amazon service like IAM or that. So I wrote US West here. And like I couldn't debug the issue because it was giving me like there was no user table found, but there was user table, but it was in different regions. So make sure that you always check like the region name as well. Okay, so user table is created. Now if I go to explore table, then here there are no items as of now. So if I go to create item, then it is, since it is a partition key, then it will always ask for like to give the value because it shouldn't be null, because primary key shouldn't be null, right? So it should have some value. So I'll write 1. Now you can add this many things here. Like these are the data types supported by DynamoDB. So I'll write string. I'll write first name. And then one more string. And then create item. So it will create an item for me. So you can query, make a query from here, or make a scan for here. So what is the difference between query and scan is like, if I do select star from users where primary key is 1, it is called querying. But select star from users, like fetching everything, it is called scan. So this is the difference. So like when you filter something and let's say you don't remember the user ID, but you have to filter the name, then you'll have to use the scan because you don't know the primary key. So you can't do the query.
Query work only on the partition.
Yes. So you can't filter partition key and sort key, 2 things. So that's why you'll almost always have to use scan if it is not related to your like primary key or sort key. Otherwise query is good. And like if you do scan for 10 millions of rows, then it will be very costly for you. So that's why when you design a database, you have to really think it out. Okay, so I created this and see here, completed, read capacity consume 0.5. So we assigned 5 RCU, and when we did the scan and ran the scan, it like consumes 0.5 RCU. So like if it is not on demand scaling, then you should really configure it as per your need. So now coming to Postman, I'll go to this app, copy this DNS name, paste this here. So I've created an API which is /users, and if I send the request, it gives null. So let's see why. So basically it should give me the list of rows, but it is not. This is like the same issue I faced while like developing in local as well. So what I needed to do is like re-upload the zip file to Beanstalk, and then it worked. So not sure why it happens, but it always happens with like whenever I deploy my app on Beanstalk and make some database kind of things, I always have to like re-upload my file to it. So let me create a new zip file. I'll name as v2. Go back to Beanstalk. This is the app. So if you want to upload the new version of the application, go to upload and deploy, choose the file. It will like increment the version here and then deploy. So then it will create a new version for you. So now health is gray. So once it is green, then it means like your new version is deployed. And it could take some time. Meanwhile, like I have one more instance running, so I can use that as well. So it's also giving null. So now let's see if my app has some error locally. So first of all, if I want to run this app locally, what are the things which I need? First is credential. So I'll copy this. So I might have my personal credential on the credential file. So what I'll do is like cp, copy the credential file, create a new credential file, my latest backup credential file. So I'll first create a copy of my current credential file, then I'll remove the credential file. So I'm deleting the credential file. Right now there is no credential file. Now I'll create a new file called credential and paste this just so that I don't expose my credential of my personal account. Okay, and then save it. Clear. Now go to this. So there is if you are using PyCharm, then there is a good extension for AWS on it. So using this extension, you can like use these many services from your PyCharm. So if I go to DynamoDB, I'll see a user table here, and if I open this, then there is this data here. So if you are using PyCharm, then there is this AWS extension you can use. Okay, so what is the next thing which I need for my in order to run my app? VNV. So I'll need a virtual environment to run that, because it is a best practice to create a virtual environment for all your application and then activate the VNV. So now I'm inside my virtual environment. Now install it. So install the requirements. Now on Mac, I can't use port 5000 because it is used by airdrop. So I'll use 6001, let's say. So my app running on 6001. So I'll copy this, paste this, fire user, and it is working. So what user API does is like it scans the DB and gives me the output. So I have one more API called get user and then user ID. So I can filter it based on user ID. So let's first add more data. So I'll write first name, so I've added one user here and another. So now if I fire get users API again, it will give me the 3 users. So basically using the Python app, I have created APIs to like create users and get users. So again, users is like scanning whole DB. But if I write user slash and some user ID, then it gives you the item, single item, filtering by item. So here I'm doing the query, and when I do users, I'm doing the scan. So there's 2 different things. Same in the code. If I go to the code, this is the first user. So this is like the query. So when I call the get item, I'm calling the get item based on the key and value I provide. So key is the primary key, value is the value of the primary key, and it will return me the response. Whereas in get all data, which is called when I fire the users API, it scans the DB and then returns everything. So this is the difference. And when you do the query, it will consume less RCU than like scan, because you're not getting everything from DynamoDB. And when I wrote when I execute this insert into table API, put API, then I use the put item API of DynamoDB, and when I don't provide any user ID, then it will create a UUID for me. But if I provide any user ID, then user underscore ID, let's say it is 4. And I think it should, okay, wrong API, post. User I did, and if I do users and get, so I think this is, and user ID is here. So basically when you create a primary key, it should be unique, and you can't do the auto increment thing like you do in RDS. So you should use something like UUID, because you can't track if it is unique or not. So mostly, I think like if you develop an application, mostly you'll have to do the scan instead of query, unless you know what is the primary key.
What is
Yeah.
the table variable?
This one. Yeah. So when I have created a class. When I create object of that class, I'm like storing the name here. But if I'm checking if this table exists or not. So I'm calling this function. If table exists, then it returns the table name. But if not, then it will create a table and then return the table name. So it is just a reference to the table of DynamoDB, like the users table. All this code is like posted on my repo, so you can use this. But if you're using in your project, then do the reference part. Otherwise, it will be like AIO. So any doubt in the code? Now let's see if Beanstalk is running the app. It is still deploying. The only like con which I see from Beanstalk side is like it is really slow. So like if you want to debug your error on Beanstalk, then it will be really hard. Otherwise, also like for that part, you can go to the logs here, then click on the request logs. So you can either request full logs or 100 line. And if you do that, what it will do is like behind the scene, it will ask the EC2 instance. It will store some logs to like S3 and fetch those logs from S3 to here. So if I open this, then these are like my logs for the app. So as long as you are sure your app will be running fine, then deploy your app on Beanstalk. Otherwise, it will be very hard to debug it. And like even if you upload your app on Beanstalk, then also you could face some issues like I'm facing right now. So what it takes is like multiple redeployment, and then it will be able to run it successfully. Because in local it works fine, but here it gives error. So now it is working. Let's go to Postman again. Alpha users API. Now it returns everything. So in the second time when I re-upload it, it works now. So like one thing to remember. And if I do the post and then Peter Parker Phi, wrong API. Yep, user edit, and then if I do users and then post get, now I have this users. Do you use Postman for your testing? So what you should do is like create an environment. Now I'll copy this, go to this, edit. I'll create demo app name. Then I'll give the current value as this, my Elastic Beanstalk IP, and then latest value is like my local value I'll give. It can be anything, keep it blank, it's fine. So this is my IP. Now if I save this, now coming back here, if I do curly braces demo app, then I can fire APIs like this. So I can just go to this and change this value. So you don't need to write it everywhere. You can just create environment variables and then do the curly braces here. And you can even store your API key here and keep this as secret so that it is not visible. And then you can go to the authorization part and then bearer token and then use your API key like here, like this, in double curly braces. The difference is that here, it will also have double, so like, you can use the variable with the double curly braces. So that's how like you can use it efficiently. So any question so far? So I think that concludes everything with the lab. So let me know if you have any question with DynamoDB or Beanstalk. Okay, so if no one have any question, then we can conclude the lab. Thank you.